Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. My name's Deborah Hatswell and you're listening to the BBR Case Files. Our episodes tonight are The Men of Ware and The Missing Woman. Now, a large hair-covered man has been seen in Scotland by a loch by two men who were out fishing. I received a report via email and the witness said, "I grew up in Dundonald, Ayrshire, Scotland. I wandered those fields and hills, swamps and lochs for the best part of my childhood and youth, right up to being an adult. I'm in my 60s now. Back then, I always had my BSA air rifle by my side, and my dog, a small whippet lurcher that was a sandy brindle in colour. And we walked for miles and miles. This was my escape from reality. In July 1981, I was 17 years old, and as the summer months crept by, it was so warm, I decided to go to Martnanam Loch for a night, catching a few pike and some perch. It was 3:30 a.m. in the morning, and as I sat down at the water's edge in one of the weeded bays, I caught sight of a black, hairy man. He was drinking from the water's edge. So I stood up and I shouted across to him, "Are you mad? You shouldn't be drinking that water." Now, for all he didn't look at me, he clearly heard me shouting. I watched this hairy man stand upright. He was somewhere between 7 and 9 feet tall, at least. And then he turned and was gone. When he was drinking, he'd been up to his waist in the water and reeds. I never told anyone about any of this over the years, as ridicule would have been unbearable in that village. It was not a nice place to grow up in, at all. As the years went by, I spread my wings, travelled a few places here and there, but I always came home to Ayrshire, never talking of this or mentioning it to anyone, by just a few very close friends who laughed when I shared it, until a friend of mine said to me out of the blue, well, he asked out loud, if I knew what the hell was walking along the edge of the loch that he'd seen many years later. It was a relief to know I wasn't the only one to have seen this man. My friend had seen the hairy man while fishing there in 1993. We had a great chat about that hairy man, which in turn led me to you and your site at BBR. In 2022, I was on my way home from the Isle of Skye. It was March, and as I drove along the uphill road on the east back of the loch line, I was looking out the car window across the loch when I spotted a huge, orangey brown looking thing on the other side. I slammed on the brakes and got out of the car, only to see this thing rapidly go up the mountainside and disappear into the trees. It had to be huge, as the distance is about 3/4 of a mile or less. I fumbled for my binoculars. I never got this hairy man in my vision. He was gone, like before, too fast for me to do anything really. It was the same as before, but years later, in a vast mountainside, miles from where I'd seen my first kind of this thing. I'm not going to call it Bigfoot, as glimpses are not facts, but I know I saw something that wasn't like us. Lots of weird things happened here. I, for one, have no explanation for these hairy man things. Now, this first experience took place very close to the area where a woman was found deceased in the fields close to Moncton, and if you're a regular listener, you'll be updated on that case. And that's become a mystery that's ever unravelling. Many years ago, a young boy was saved from certain death when he was captured by a hairy, werewolf-like creature when he became stuck on the side of a cliff in Cransdale in Scotland. Now, when I say werewolf, I don't mean a werewolf, the creature of popular culture, the Hammer House of horror creature. I've had to clarify that over the years. They, in archaic English terms, is the word for an adult male. Wolf, of course, means wolf. So werewolf is one of the first terms used for these creatures seen here in the UK. I believe that is the creature that saved Keith all those years ago from that cliffside. Many years later, we are still in touch. We often share info and strange cases with each other. Recently, Keith got in touch with me and asked if I'd look into the case of Eliza and Henrietta Hutsey, who vanished from the Victoria Bridge area of Aberdeen earlier this year. As he knows my research into the cases in the UK, where ordinary folk who were out walking suddenly disappear and they're gone, vanished out of sight, only to turn up deceased in strange and mysterious circumstances back in the area they went missing. Eliza and Henrietta are part of a set of triplets, and for this podcast I will use the word twins when I speak about them. Now, I knew the case. I remember it being released in the Hungarian press in early Jan 2025. By the time I spoke with Keith, I knew that both ladies had already passed on, but they were still missing at that point. I don't know how, but I did feel that they'd be discovered eventually along the River Dee where they'd vanished. Sadly, that did turn out to be the case, and since then the mystery has deepened. How did they both end up in the river? And why were they in that area to begin with? Did one of them get into trouble? The other one tried to help and they both perished? Or was it a case of foul play? Eliza and Henrietta were featured in the daily Hungarian newspaper, and that announced on the 7th of January that the two ladies gone missing in Scotland. The article said that Police Scotland is conducting an extensive search for Eliza and Henrietta, 32-year-old Hungarian twin sisters who have been missing in Aberdeen since the early hours of the 7th of January. The sisters, who lived in Aberdeen and had done so for 6 years, were last seen on CCTV at 12 minutes past 2 near Victoria Bridge on Market Street, and that's 12 minutes past 2 a.m. in the morning. They were observed crossing the bridge and heading onto a footpath along the River Dee towards the Aberdeen Boat Club. Search efforts included the use of police dogs, marine units, while officers have appealed to businesses in the South Esplanade and the Menzies Road area to look at CCTV and dashcam footage from that period. Both sisters are described as white and slim with long brown hair. Chief Inspector Darren Bruce stated, "We urge anyone who has seen Eliza or Henrietta or who has information about their whereabouts to contact Police Scotland." The Hungarian authorities have also been informed, and efforts to locate the twins continue in collaboration with local and international agencies. Then, on the 14th of Jan 2025, it was announced in the newspaper that major clues had emerged in the hunt for the missing sisters. Officers said that Eliza and Henrietta had not undertaken any suspicious financial transactions since their disappearance on January the 7th. Police Scotland also told reporters in a press conference that the Hungarian twins had one mobile phone in them and that they'd left another mobile device back at the flat. Their landlord said they'd meant to leave the tenancy days before they went missing, and that's when he raised the alarm. Now, police revisited the scene in the early hours of Tuesday, January the 14th, and spoke to pedestrians and motorists in a bid to better understand the sisters' movements. The family, who still live in Hungary, have asked for respect, adding that all we want is for them to be found. Now, on the 10th of February 2025, the bodies were recovered from an Aberdeen river, confirmed to be the missing sisters. A woman's body was reported in the newspaper to have been recovered from the river near the Queen Elizabeth Bridge just before 8 a.m. on Friday, January the 31st, while the body of a second woman was found in an area of the river near the Victoria Bridge, also around 9:05 p.m. that day. Police say they now have been formally identified and there do not appear to be any suspicious circumstances. Now, I'd question this theory simply because those areas were searched extensively by search parties, research teams, and no sign of them was found. It's also covered by CCTV. Why did they leave the path that night? It was 2 a.m. in freezing cold weather. So assume they were walking quickly to the next destination. They wouldn't have been hanging around. Now, was that destination another club or on their way home? Now the case has been closed, these questions will remain unanswered. This case reminds me of the strange disappearance of Nicola Bulley, who lived in the northwest of England in a place I know well as I fished it. I fished the area with my dad a few times. The Lancashire mother of two disappeared on the 27th of January 2023 while walking her dog in St Michael's on the Wyre, shortly after taking her daughter to school. So once again, we have a case in winter where a woman, going about her everyday business, vanishes to only, to be found weeks later in the same spot that they vanished, even though that spot's being searched. In Nicola's case, we do have a timeline of events, but in some ways that just deepens the mystery. At 8:53 a.m, Nicola dropped her children off at school. She then sent an email to her employer. At 8:57, 4 minutes later, she sent a text to a friend to arrange a meet-up for their children that week. She then joined a Microsoft Teams call at 9:01, keeping her phone's camera and microphone disengaged. She was last seen at approximately 10 minutes past 9, walking in the riverside field with her dog off its lead. At 9:20, her phone was believed to be in the vicinity of a riverside bench. At 9:30, the Teams call ended, and it was at that point Nicola vanished, because at 9:33, just 3 minutes later, a passerby discovered the phone, which was still connected to the call, on the bench. The family dog was found alone near the bench and showed no signs of having been in the river. Lancashire Constabulary said that there was no evidence of either suspicious activity or third-party involvement in the disappearance of Nicola, and they quickly stated that their working hypothesis was that she'd fallen into the River Wye. However, an extensive search of the river and surrounding land involving police divers, search and rescue, helicopters, sniffer dogs and drones found no body. And then we have the hundreds of unofficial searchers, including YouTubers, TikTokers, and Uncle Tom and Cobley and all, that turned up with their own theories and walked that land. And several ended up being charged for actually trampling the crime scene and for online trolling of Nicola's family, including her partner, who were all ruled out as suspects by the police very early on in the investigation. When I first heard she'd vanished, I actually turned to Mark and I said, "That poor lady's gone, she'll turn up again in a couple of weeks." And on the 19th of February, Nicola's body was indeed found in the river by a man and a woman walking in that area, about a mile downstream of St Michael's on the Wyre. The inquest, which concluded in June of 2023, determined that Nicola Bulley's death was due to accidental drowning. Now, there are still some glaring inconsistencies in this case, which were not answered before the case was closed. The area where Nicola's body was found had been searched extensively in the weeks after her disappearance. There were even helicopters above, the area searching night and day, and they didn't spot her. Hundreds of people walked both those banks, radiating out in a search for Nicola, and the spot where she was found had been visited by those searchers. Some rumours suggest Nicola took her own life. Well, why would she arrange a play date for her children later in the week? The dog was dry when he was found, so that rules out the rumours that she went in the water after the dog, or to get the dog's toy. 9:30 a.m. was the last contact with her work colleague, and Nicola was her usual friendly self. There were no signs of anything that was worrying her. At 9:33, her phone was found by passers-by near the bench. What happened in those 3 minutes? What stopped Nicola from coming home that day? Just like Eliza and Henrietta, something happened in those dark winter time that ended in the disappearance of a healthy young lady with the whole world ahead of them, That's what stopped them returning to their families. I became aware of the pattern of missing women who suddenly vanish around the winter months in the winter of 2018. In fact, it was the 28th of November 2018 when Greater Manchester Police started to search the river in an area in Salford because they'd found a human leg in the River Irwell. A GMP spokesman stated that inquiries into the circumstances are ongoing. The alarm were raised by passers-by. Emergency service was scrambled to a stretch of river near the Red Jubilee Bridge. Police divers were seen entering the water, while officers were seen trawling the banks of the river. Witnesses said 2 black bags were later placed in a van by police after being pulled from the water. Several months later, the victim was identified as local woman Marie Scott, who'd last been seen shopping for Christmas gifts in Manchester and Bury in the winter of 2017. The leg belonged to Marie Scott, and DNA was able to prove that. The force said at this stage there is no reason to believe there was any foul play or any suspicious circumstances. However, they did not disclose why 2 black bags were removed on scene, but only 1 leg was reported. What was in the second black bag? How, without the rest of Marie's remains, could it be determined that there was no foul play or any suspicious circumstances? That's impossible to tell from 1 lower limb. I don't care how good of a coroner you are. How do you know? Marie's family were involved in a desperate search to find her after she boarded a tram to Manchester from Altrincham. She was then seen several times around the Deansgate and Deansgate Locks area. Then she took the Metrolink from Deansgate Castlefield stop to the Victoria station. She got into a taxi and travelled to Heaton Park before changing her mind about getting out and asked the driver to take her to the Rock shopping centre in Bury to shop for a gift for her grandbaby. She was then captured on CCTV walking along Rochdale Road towards the It's a Baby clothes shop, and a new image was released later showing her there at about 3:15 p.m, and that was the last confirmed sighting of her. And then on the 24th of January 2020 there was an update. Body parts of Marie Scott were found in the Manchester Ship Canal more than 2 years after she went missing. The discovery comes a year after her lower leg was found. Body parts confirmed to be those of the missing woman Marie Scott had been found on marshes near the Manchester Ship Canal. The remains, found around 1 mile from Frodsham in Cheshire, were spotted on Sunday, December the 15th, 2019. Frodsham is around 30 miles away from the area where Marie's leg was discovered and almost 40 miles away from where she was last seen. Marie is just one of many females found in these kind of circumstances, and in the majority of the cases, the cause of death is declared as accidental. All of these women were healthy in areas they knew well. What made them vanish? What happened that day? And why is the pattern winter time from November to January in each and every one of these cases? I will bring you more information on this in a future podcast, explaining the connections in far more detail. Macabre as those cases are, our next case is even spookier. Sitting amongst the ancient graveyard on the lonely Scottish peninsula, are secrets as old as time. From body snatchers to black stalking mists, it's a place best visited in the daytime. Jo Campbell, who is a co-founder of Phenomenon Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire Group, shared her experience with a horrible red-eyed entity with me that happened when she was a young child. Jo also shared her experience on Facebook, and other people commented about their own events that had taken place in the same churchyard, which is St Fittick. Jo said, "This particular experience I'm going to tell you about happened when I was about 8 years old. Back then, us youngsters all got to stay out later with the older kids in summer. So we all decided to go and play hide and seek in St Fittick graveyard. The gate was locked, so we all climbed over the wall and, we just began to play the game. One of the older kids saw something black with red glowing eyes that was on top of the wall. I'd never seen somebody move so fast to get out of the place. Everyone was jumping to get out of there, and I was the only one left in the graveyard trying to climb up and over the wall. And that's when I saw it. The black mist with red eyes was just sitting on top of the wall. Now fast forward a few days back, and I was telling Kevin Duncan on a video call about this, when his eyes widened as he couldn't believe the serendipity, as him and his brother both experienced the same entity in the same place. And Joe said to have the experience and for it to be confirmed by others years later was mind-blowing for her, although it left her with some questions. She wanted to know if it was a gatekeeper, of the graveyard, or something else entirely. She said, who knows? All I know is, even now, I leave silver coins for the gatekeeper who protects the graveyard whenever I visit. The last sighting of the black mist with red eyes was around 2020, 2021, as far as I'm aware. Kevin Duncan, who Joe mentioned, shared his experience and he said, aye, that's correct, Joe. My brother and I saw it when we were out walking. We lived close to it last. We saw it in 2020 and we saw it together in late 2021. It hung around for a couple of minutes that time. We pointed a torch straight at it. It never moved until we walked towards it, and then it vanished. It was all very strange. One of the group members, Erin Lodge, said she'd had an experience in the same churchyard. She said, when I was around maybe 9 or 10, I experienced seeing ladies, 2 ladies at the gate of St Fittick's, looking like they were crying, wearing old-fashioned clothes and hats, and then they just disappeared. As I said earlier, St Fittick's Church has a very macabre reputation, and I don't mean the dark shadow mist with the dark red eyes or the spectral ladies. The church is also home to poor Mrs Stark. Now, the old parish church that sits at Nig Bay was a perfect location for body snatching due to its remoteness. Stuck in the middle of a field with very few places to hide. 3 anatomy students who'd come to the churchyard one particular evening were determined to leave with a cadaver. Their target was 90-year-old Janet Spark, who was born Janet Young, and she was a pensioner from Aberdeen. She was buried on the 22nd of December 1808. Her snatching was unfortunately discovered on Christmas Day when the minister entered the churchyard on his way to give a sermon. He was confronted with wood from the coffin strewn across the courtyard. The burial shroud was tossed aside, and there was blood stains on the grass. But unknown to the parishioners of Nig, this wouldn't be the last time that they'd be seeing Janet, for she had one more appearance to make before finally being put to rest. Janet Spark had only been interned in the cold Aberdeenshire soil for 3 days before she was pulled out and stripped of her grave clothes. As the minister entered the churchyard, he would have known something was amiss. Strewn across the grass were broken pieces of the lid of the coffin, tatters of grave linen, and marks of blood left by the grave. On December the 25th, 1808, the minister informed the session that on the night between Thursday and Friday, the corpse of Mrs. Janet Young, an aged woman from Aberdeenshire, had been buried, and she had been taken up and carried away. Now, the snatching itself had been a bungled affair. Disturbed midway through the act, the students who had taken her were becoming more and more agitated as the raid went on. Being disturbed by barking dogs as they were digging down into the grave certainly didn't help. Deciding not to risk getting caught, a new plan was devised. One that was hoped would secure the body snatchers a cadaver. They used to get a lot of money for them in those days. The only way a corpse could leave that graveyard was via the ferry, which ran, to and from Aberdeen across the mouth of the harbour. Transporting a cadaver squashed into a hamper and putting it on the back of a mail coach was one thing, but putting it on a ferry would have been quite another. Remarkably, the new plan involved reburying Mrs. Spark, not back in a grave, but in the sandy banks of the Bay of Nig, with the idea of retrieving her at a more favourable time. However, as the parish records recall, things for the students didn't quite turn out to plan. On February the 12th, the minister stated that the body had been found. Those who had taken it out of the grave had been obliged, from apprehension of being detected, to put it for a time in the sand of the bay. And that was just the start. For what happened next, I expect, wasn't even thought of when the students were devising how to store Janet's body. Poor Janet, what a bloody Christmas. A late storm of the sea had raised, and it had carried the body to the south side of the bay, where it had been found, and afterwards it was decently buried again. Now, the broken coffin lid and the graves and all of that was cleaned up, obviously, and it was just a shambles from start to finish. Even the spade was discovered, um, and it belonged to the student's father. And although none of the students involved were caught on this occasion, rumours say that the students fled the county while things calmed down after paying compensation to the deceased family. Oh my word. In 1816, the superintendent of Aberdeen Harbour Works, Mr. Gibb, gifted a huge mark stone to the church in the hope that that would deter the local fishermen from stealing cadavers. Oh my God. I wonder, in the midst of all this shambles and calamities, if the dark mist with the red eyes is connected in any way to the desecration and disrespectful acts of the body snatchers. Has that left a stain on the ground there? And also, we don't know who's buried there. In olden times, if you had money, you were buried in the churchyard, and if you didn't, you were buried outside the wall. So there could be all manner of burials that were not on consecrated ground that have maybe made this negative entity appear in some way. And that's just me thinking out loud, it's not fact, is it? But it would seem that St Fittick's Church is the kind of place that you should really only visit in the day. Now, over the years, I've taken quite a few reports from Aberdeen, and many of them have come into BBR through YouTube comments. And this one is no different, and I'll share a couple of them with you. Brent the Gent said, in 2007, I was pretty fed up with things at home, and I decided to camp about 4 miles north of the River Don in Aberdeen for a night. And as I lay there, about 2 a.m, listening to the waves, trying to get to sleep, I heard noises that made me think someone had just jumped from the nearby dunes. I sat up, ready to exit my tent, when I heard something walk across the shale line, and it was right outside the tent. As I went to open the zip, it growled, like the sound I've heard big cats make when issuing a threat. I didn't know, what was out there, and I didn't want to get out of the tent, so I just stayed there for around an hour. I waited until it started to get light, around 3 a.m, ish. When I came out of the tent, there was clear pug marks going right around my tent and along the shore, and it was for certain that that was a big cat. I know for defo that we had a few big cat reports up there over the years. I would agree with Brent. There have been a lot of large cat reports across Scotland as a whole, really. And then Scotty Mack said, my father was out jogging with his pal about 8 years ago. We're living in Aberdeenshire, Scotland. And he's been running lately to strengthen his lungs as he has allergies in the summer, cripple him. Anyway, he runs around the grounds of Fyvie Castle at night with his pal, every other night. He came home a couple of days ago and told me he'd seen a demon hiding in the trees. Both my dad and his friend wear head torches as it's pitch black at night. So as they're running, my father caught a glimpse of eyeshine in the distance off the track. And as they got closer to the eyes, they got bigger and bigger. And whatever it was began to move lower to the ground. My father said they were the biggest yellow eyes he'd ever seen, and that they were really far apart, and that it was no dog or no cat. They both stopped to look at what it was, and his pal could barely make out that it had big pointy ears too. They freaked out, ran away. The next day they went back during the daytime to look for tracks, or to see if it could have been an owl sitting on a branch of a tree or something. Anyway, they found what my father said was a witch's coven. They found a big circle on the forest floor made of sticks and twigs, with symbols on the inside of it made with twigs. And in the middle of it, he said it looked like a dinosaur creature sculpture made with sticks and twigs. Anyway, that's how I'm here watching this video. The massive yellow eyes. He said what got me was the weird animal made with twigs in the middle of the circle. Maybe it was summoned here by a spell or something. He couldn't sleep for days after seeing it, my dad. I suggested it was cats, dogs, owls, eagles, heron, sheep, cows, even a mountain lion. And he said no. Him and his mate were really shook up. It was the yellow eyes that were so far apart that did it. He said they glowed. Without the light shining on them, they illuminated in the dark. And the pointed ears. I thought maybe an owl, but he just said no, it was too weird. Now, there has been big cats here in Aberdeenshire too, but who knows? In another area of Scotland, I received a report from a man via YouTube who saw a strange creature in Lanark. And Mark Stewart is his name, and he said, "Hi Deb, I'm from a small town near Lanark in Scotland, and had a weird sighting on the way to Lanark a couple of days before Christmas 2024. It happened when we had that freezing fog that didn't seem to lift for several days. I was on my way to Lanark in the morning. I was coming onto Lee Woods area, and I saw a huge bipedal thin thing. It was about 7, 8 foot tall. The only thing I can describe it as is a werewolf. It looked like one of the kids' film things, Harry Potter, but with a larger head and ears. It was definitely male, if you get what I mean. It crossed the road from one side of the bridge to the other in 3 strides while looking straight into my soul. Well, it felt like that anyway. I'm not easily spooked. I'm 46 and a dad and a granddad. I've done my fair share of hunting and shooting out in the woods, so I don't scare easily. But this experience has scared me to the point that I won't walk in any woods in this area alone anymore." Much further south, not too far from where I live, is a place that also has its fair share of red-eyed, black, humanoid shadow beings roaming the area. And many an outdoorsman have had nights camping and fishing there that they wish they could forget. Those cases happened in the beautiful Delamere forest area, enjoyed by locals and visitors alike. Delamere has a popular place for wild campers. After families have left the trails and the cafes for home, the car park's empty, and as dusk approaches, it becomes a very different place. For centuries, it has been known as a haunted forest due to the strange screams, human-like figures, bobbing lights, and even encounters with wolf-like beings. Even in modern times, there are reports from visitors to the forest and drivers on the road that runs close by to it. There are urban explorers who've seen red-eyed beasts, and in one camping event, the police were called to help 2 men who'd been surrounded by dogmen all night. 2 soldiers who camped in the area also had a night they will never forget. The gentleman's name is Paul Fitzpatrick, and he said, "Myself and 2 of my mates went to Delamere Forest one weekend while we were in the armed forces. We went to relax, have a few beers, sleeping under the stars on a night of relaxing. A few hours after we fell asleep, we all woke up with the feeling that we weren't alone. I don't remember who woke us up, as we all came to at the same time. We just knew there was something out there, and it was close to us, just out of sight. We knew by our training to trust our senses. No sleep was going to happen, so we all got up and headed out. We could hear something following us, but it was way behind us. It was like it was circling us. It felt like it was escorting us out of the forest. It took us a while to get out of there, but once we saw the main road, we picked up our speed. Whatever was in that forest kept pace with us until we hit the area where the car was parked. Once we were out with the car. We drove out of there, just couldn't get out there quick enough. When we got home, my mate realised he'd dropped his phone, and we weren't keen to go back, but we decided to leave it till afternoon time, go in good light. We went back and we found his phone. The atmosphere had completely changed. It was warm, inviting, not like the night before. Now, David Bunce and his friend had a similar experience in 2019, and it was so bad they requested the presence of the local police. David and his friend Danny were wild camping in the forest along the satellite trail when they became so scared by the things they could see happening around them and the noises that were happening in their campsite. There was a great deal of noise off in the trees, and along with the sounds of breaking branches were also the sound of grunts and growls that were so bad it caused the men to fear for their lives, which led them to call the police around 3 a.m. 5 hours later, 2 officers from the local force arrived around 8 a.m. They escorted the men from the area. Both of these men described the feeling of being watched from the tree line as intense and believed that they were being watched by what they could only describe as an upright canine creature, now often called dogman, or werewolves, using the old English term of were, meaning man. So in essence, the man-wolf. Both David and Danny state that no matter how hard it was to stay in the tent that night, waiting until morning seemed far better than the only other alternative, which was to leave the tents, walk out alone to the car park, through the area they were being watched from. So after hours of being plagued, that's why they call the police. Whether you choose to believe them or not, this was the second occasion 2 people camping in the forest close to the lake area have reported feeling watched from within the trees to report howls and growls and something moving around camp. On one occasion, stones were thrown to move the campers away from the area. This strategy worked a treat because they fled in horror. But it wasn't just in the forest itself where the strange and unexpected occurrences happened. It's also a feature on the road that runs through the area too. There are also several reports of a red-eyed thing. Now, a dark grey humanoid was seen on that road in the summer of 2020. And in December of 2010, 10 years before, a number of people made a report of terrible screaming that happened when they were camping overnight. A local woman stated that when she grew up in the area, several of the children would talk about the red-eyed thing. And then an urban explorer that I know, Michael, went with his friends in 2018, and he also saw a red-eyed dark shape over in the woodland when he was urban exploring and filming for YouTube. Other people have reported to me that they've felt, especially on the A49, very, very unwell, like a feeling that could come over them, that just completely knocks them sick. And if memory serves me right, one of the witnesses said that humanoid beings have been seen in the forest for years, certainly in the 70s and 80s. Now, as we know, Delamere Forest is not the only area in the UK that has a history of reports featuring a dog or a wolf-like humanoid. And one I want to finish on tonight, I think, is quite important because it talks about, in a way, the connection between our ancient sites and what people report seeing in modern times. Pete Red explained an experience that happened to him in 1990, and he said, in 1990, I was at the Barbary Castle crop circle. It was one of the first pictograms, and it was actually amazing. Inside the crop circle, there was plenty of hippies, meditating, etc. Anyway, we eventually left, and a 2-minute walk back to the car, which was just down the lane. Beautiful sunny day. There was absolutely nothing to be scared of. Nothing. Anyway, as I nearly reached the car, I was overcome with an unbelievable feeling of fear. It was totally unnerving. I've never, ever in my 60 years experienced anything like it. And honestly, I've lived a life where fear is something I know pretty well. I couldn't, for the life of me, understand where this fear came from. I then looked to my right, and sat there, totally out of place, as a bloody Anubis. You know, the Egyptian god that was a dog. What the fuck? He was just sat there, looking straight ahead. It was crazy. Now, in that area, very close by, there was a report from 2014 that was made to the paranormal database from a couple who were driving there on Stoneover Lane. The occupants of the car watched as a figure dashed across the road and vanished into a nearby field. The weather was clear and there was no other traffic around. So they got a good look at what they described as a creature. All very strange indeed. Is it connected to the werewolves? I don't know. Or is it all connected? Is it a spider web of incidents that are tied together in some way? I don't know. I don't know what happened to those unfortunate people that vanished and never made it home. But it changed the lives of their families and loved ones forever. I like to think that all these cases are not connected in any way, and what we have is a large series of coincidences. But I don't think that's the case. And no doubt there will be others who vanish like this from our nature spaces here in the UK and globally. With a short story in the newspaper containing no real information. No doubt you have your own concerns, thoughts and theories in these cases, as do I. Hopefully we're wrong, but I predict by early summer more cases will emerge. Be safe out there. Keep well. If you've enjoyed tonight's content and you're not subscribed to my channel, please join us as we share uploads like this every week. If you're a regular listener, thank you, and I will see you all at the same time next week. Good night, everyone.